All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Everyone looks like they have their pizza. So I'm Cornell Clayton. I'm director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute at Washington State University. And on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today, which features Bob Ferguson, who's the Attorney General of the state of Washington. Bob is the 18th Attorney General in Washington. He was first elected to his office in 2012 and was recently re-elected to his third term in 2020. As the Attorney General, Bob has instituted a number of innovations to his office, including creating a dedicated unit to enforce the state's campaign finance laws, creation of a council for environmental protection, and establishing the first office of civil rights in the Attorney General's office. His office has been involved in many high-profile lawsuits, including against the Trump administration's over its travel ban, against the Obama administration over worker safety at Hanford, and against the Grocery Manufacturers Association over violations of campaign finance laws here in the state. His office just recently won a major victory against Meta, Facebook's parent corporation, for violating Washington's campaign finance transparency law, for which he is now seeking a $24 million fine. I'm sure you'll be talking about that today. In 2017, Bob was named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people. He received his JD from New York University School of Law in 1995 and a political science degree from a lesser university on the other side of the Cascades, where he also served as a student body president. And Bob is a good friend of the Foley Institute. We are very fortunate every time he's over on this side of the state, he takes time out of his busy schedule to come to the Foley Institute. Join me now in welcoming Bob Ferguson.
Thanks so much, Cornell, and thanks to you, Richard, the whole team here for inviting me over again. It's great to see everybody in person, which is wonderful after, I think, doing this a couple of years via Zoom. So it's great to see you all in person and to be on campus on a beautiful day. Time Magazine, 100 Most Influential People in the World, when I got nominated for this. And I'm from a big family. I've got 6 siblings. I've got a whole bunch of older brothers. And after that came out, my oldest brother, Tom, called me up. He was in California. He said, Bob, it's quite a promotion. Time Magazine named you one of the 100 most influential people in the world because you're not even the most influential person in our family. That's what a big brother is for at a time like that. So hey, what I'm going to do is, what I've done before is, we've got till 1 o'clock, so I'll take maybe half the time to chat about a couple cases that are going on in the office, Facebook, Meta being one, and maybe some chat about our litigation around the opioids epidemic that we've been engaged on, and then really leave it up to whatever questions you have. If it works for you guys, maybe the first folks who want to ask questions about the cases I talk about, we'll leave with those and open up anything that you want to ask about. The rules for my questions are very strict. You can ask about whatever you want. So if you want to ask something on any case, I'll do my best to recall it. If you want to ask about sort of political stuff, I'm happy to chat about that. What life is like as an attorney general, working with other AGs, you name it. I'm happy to do my best to answer any questions that you might have. So let's talk about Facebook Meta, Facebook first, and it's part of. Maybe I should start with the AG's office. As many of you may know, we're the largest law firm in the state of Washington. We've got folks in our office right here right now. We have multiple offices all around the state, including right here at Washington State University, one of our important clients, of course. And so we have, to give you a sense of scale, we have more than 700 attorneys, more than 700 professional staff. People are always shocked when they hear how large our operation is. We're the 5th largest AG's office in the country, maybe number 4 now. We're always growing, but we're a large operation. So think of our work in 2 buckets. I'm kind of oversimplifying, but think of our work in 2 buckets. The biggest bucket is the work we do on behalf of the state. So I had a meeting earlier today with the president of Washington State University. That's a client of mine. That's a client of our office and my legal team. We give legal advice to the president or all parts of Washington State University. And we do that for literally hundreds of state boards, commissions, agencies, the governor, the legislature, you name it. So they are all clients of ours, right? So we give legal advice to those clients, but those clients make the decisions. So in a conversation with the university president today about we had a particular thing we're talking about, I'm obviously emphasizing it's his decision how he wants to proceed on that matter we were talking about. Our job is give him good options on how to proceed, and he makes the decision. Just like if any lawyer gives you, your family, your business, you as an individual gives you advice, you decide what to do, the lawyer gives you advice. So that's the biggest bulk of what we do. The other part of what we do, which will be probably the topic of this conversation, is work we do directly on behalf of the people of the state of Washington. So think areas like consumer protection, civil rights, federal litigation, antitrust, what we call complex litigation, all of those areas, environmental enforcement, I think you mentioned, Cornell. In those areas, if you read about our office, you're typically reading about something in that area, right? A lawsuit we file on behalf of the people. So in that situation, I'll talk about this Facebook case. I don't call up the governor before filing a lawsuit against Facebook to say, hey, Governor Inslee, is it okay if I file this lawsuit? Those are my decisions to make as Attorney General because the lawsuit's being brought on your behalf. Frankly, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, right? It's being brought on your behalf. And so it's the AG's decision to decide every aspect of that case. Settle the case, file the case, investigate the case, go to court in the case. Those are my decisions. And so, and in those cases, I'll talk about, in our consumer protection work we do, we receive about 20,000 consumer complaints a year. In any case we bring, I make the decision in all those cases, whether I file or not. Big case, small case, whether you read about it in the paper or don't, I get a memo and I make that decision. The primary reason is I just really believe that when the state files a lawsuit against you, that's probably a bad day at the office for you individually or your business, right? And just has always seemed to me that in bringing the power of the state behind a lawsuit on behalf of the people, it should be the Attorney General who ultimately decides, right, whether to file that lawsuit or not. So the Facebook case is a good example. So the Facebook case actually will start back in ancient history. I was barely alive, but back in 1971 or 1972, a group of citizen activists got together to put something on the ballot, an initiative on the ballot. And what the initiative was, I'm going to oversimplify it, but these citizen activists felt that there was not sufficient transparency with our elections in Washington state. Who's donating campaigns, how much they're donating, how easy or difficult it was to get that information about those campaigns, to know who's paying for ads you would see on TV or see in the newspaper. So what they did was they put an initiative on the ballot, which passed overwhelmingly by the people of the state of Washington. And it did many, many things. So if someone writes me a check, for example, right? If that older brother of mine writes me a check for $100, I need to disclose $100, Tom Ferguson, where he lives in California. So you can look up and see who's writing checks to Bob Ferguson. Is it corporations, individuals, how much, how little, you get the idea. That's all transparent to you with a couple clicks of a button. A piece of what this effort did, and which, by the way, Washington has arguably the most robust campaign finance transparency law of any state in the union, by the way. One key element of this law is that if you saw a political ad in your local paper, or you saw it on your evening news tonight, you could go to that TV station. You could walk in there today and say, hey, you know what? I want to see your book on your political ads right now. And what they will literally do is they'll reach behind the counter and pull out a binder. And you open up and it'll show every ad, political ad, that they're showing. And they have to provide certain information under this state law. Who's paying for the ad? How long is it going to be airing? Contact information. You get the idea, right? They've got to provide that information to you, so there's transparency about who's paying for these ads. So every small town paper, every major radio station, they've got to do this. Well, politics is always evolving. Technology is always evolving. And campaigns start using social media to pay for their political advertising, of course. It's important. And so people start going to Facebook to put political ads. Candidates would do that. Well, Washingtonians went to Facebook saying, we want to see your book on those ads. Who's paying for them? Well, Facebook wasn't keeping that. They weren't providing that information. So, long story very short, we brought a lawsuit against them several years ago, saying, hey, you need to do this just like any small town paper, just like any TV station, you've got to provide. The fact that you're a social media company doesn't make any difference. You're taking in political ads, right? You're showing them, you've got to disclose those to the people when they ask. So in the end, that case settled. They paid several $100,000, and they just said, you know what, it's too complicated for us to actually follow the law. We're just not going to take the political ads anymore. Which is their right. They don't have to take political ads. They said, we're just not going to take them anymore. Now, you're all going to be shocked to know that they kept taking the ads after paying the penalty, okay, and after promising they weren't going to. So we got more complaints. So we had to file another lawsuit against them. And that's what brings us to our current litigation. So we had to file another one. Well, this time, they didn't say we're going to stop taking the ads. This time, they didn't simply say, hey, that pesky Washington state law doesn't apply to us for some legal reason. What Facebook and their army of lawyers from Washington, D.C. Are saying is that the law itself is unconstitutional. Okay? So Facebook, right, multi-zillion-dollar company, says we don't want to follow that law that everybody else has to follow, and we're going to challenge its constitutionality, and we're going to hire the biggest, best law firms in the world to fly out to King County Superior Court to argue that. Which means that they're successful. That doesn't just mean, of course, that Facebook wouldn't have to disclose that to all of you. Well, it means that TV station wouldn't have to either, and that radio station, and that small town newspaper, or the Seattle Times in my town, they wouldn't have to provide that to you. That they're literally challenging the underpinnings of that law because they don't want to follow it. So, so we went to court, and so we have a judge in King County Superior Court. His name's Judge North, and so I'll spare you all the legal details of this case, but the stakes are pretty high, right? And in this case, we were alleging that they had violated this law many, many times, right? People coming in to ask for this. And the case was resolved in what we call summary judgment. So because there's no dispute about the facts of the case, right? We're not saying one thing they necessarily disagree with, it's just a dispute about the law. Does the law apply to Facebook or not, is basically the issue. And so the judge ruled on summary judgment just a couple of weeks ago and ruled in our favor. So it's a big win for us. Number two, the judge determined that they had violated the law 822 times. Okay. Importantly, what the judge decided is that in issuing penalties for under this law, a judge can issue a penalty of up to $10,000 per violation. Importantly, the judge can triple that penalty if he or she determines that the violation of the law was intentional. Okay, then you can triple it, so go up to $30,000. So to be clear, a judge could issue a penalty of $1 or $30,000 for each of those 822 violations. The judge will determine that on today's Tuesday, Wednesday. Today's Tuesday, on Friday. I think the hearing's on Friday, and so you can do the math, which I think Cornell already did. If you make it a maximum penalty and multiply it 822 times, you come out to like $24.6 million. Not that I'm counting every penny, but I think it's $24.6 million. And so we just filed our papers seeking the maximum penalty. So the court, again, I won't go into details on law, but the court, in making that decision, there's a list of factors that the court can look at in determining whether or what the penalty should be. Things like, are you a repeat offender of the law? They are. Right? How sophisticated are you as an entity? Right? Are you an individual who's running a grassroots operation and, man, I didn't quite realize all this stuff? Or are you a multi-zillion-dollar corporation that has an army of attorneys to help you follow the law? Check that box as well. You get the idea. And so my view is you have a maximum penalty for a reason, right? You have to communicate to the offender that these laws are important, and so that's what we're seeking. We also the judge also ruled we get our costs and fees back, and the judge is tripling that. So that'll be millions more that we'll receive for the cost of bringing this case. And so the case has gotten some national attention, probably for a lot of reasons. You know, who the target is, Facebook. I think a couple of thoughts I just would add to it is that, and obviously it might get appealed, right? They might well appeal the case, and so that the case may not be over for a while. You know, you mentioned, I think, Cornell, the campaign finance case we had against the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which I gave, I think, a talk about this some years ago, which was another huge campaign finance case that we had that we prevailed on. And, you know, for me, it is maddening for me, you know, speaking as a Washingtonian, not as your Attorney General, that corporations as large and sophisticated as Facebook can't be bothered to follow a law that a group of Washingtonians got together 50 years ago to create transparency in the most important part of our democracy. Right? Like, what the hell is up with that? Honestly, what the hell is up with that? And so, you know, easy decision I made all month was seeking the maximum penalty against those guys. Easiest decision all month long. And I'm not sure what it takes to get their attention on this, right? these things matter. I'm not sure if they're paying attention, but we have some serious threats to our republic and our democracy going on right now. And a part of that is an alarming number of Americans who have lost a certain trust in our electoral process, right? We can debate the reasons for that all day long, but no one can dispute that having transparency in our elections is a good thing for the health of our democracy. And the fact that a company as sophisticated as Facebook doesn't just say the law shouldn't apply to us, but says that law is unconstitutional, that to me is breathtaking, honestly. And I just said publicly, it is my hope they will finally apologize for their conduct, accept responsibility, and not appeal the case. What I would expect of my kids if they violate the law, or what you'd expect of me if I violate the law, right? Apologize, won't happen again, we'll make this right. I'm not optimistic that that's what they're gonna do, but I will say it did feel very good that they sent in this army of lawyers from Washington, D.C. into a courtroom in downtown Seattle, and a bunch of attorneys, professional staff from my office were there to greet them, and we beat them in court. And we're confident on appeal we'll win. That said, before I leave this case, these cases are always tricky, right? And when the other side has very good lawyers, the cases are never slam dunks. But the team did a great job in this case, and so wait for Friday. We'll know what the penalties are on Friday. Totally up to the judge. Judge could say $1. The judge could say 24.6 million, or really anything between. So we'll see what happens there. And the other thing I'll mention briefly in the next few minutes, then we'll open up to your questions, is, and I won't go into the details of these cases, maybe more sort of philosophically the approach around them, is if there's been a series of cases you may have read about related to the opioids epidemic. The opioids epidemic is obviously having massive consequences for our country, for communities across our state, families in our state. And on average, I think it's 2 or 3 people die every day in our state due to an opioid overdose. That's not having the overdose, that's dying because of the overdose. And it doesn't care about your jurisdiction's a blue one or a red one or an urban one or a rural one, or how old you are, how young you are, or what your gender is, or it doesn't matter, right? It's indiscriminate. This is indiscriminate. And so there have been a series of cases, many brought by state AGs, but also some local jurisdictions, counties, cities, you name it, individuals as well. But a lot of attention has been around cases brought by state AGs on behalf of their states against large corporations like Purdue Pharmaceutical, Sackler families connected with Purdue Pharmaceutical, you've probably heard about them, and distributors of opioids. These are like Fortune 20 companies, think Cardinal Health, AmerisourceBergen, large corporations. And each case is a little bit different, but key aspects of it would be that in the view of AGs like myself, and this is every AG, literally every AG has been involved in this, is that these corporations essentially put profits above following the law. So in some of these cases, they knew how addictive opioids, their products are, right? That they knew. They had their own people in their companies tell them how addictive they are. But when they promoted their products out to doctors, right, or to pharmacies, they minimized the addictive qualities of those opioids. And you can't do that, right? When you promote a product, which you're allowed to do, you cannot do that in an unfair or deceptive manner. That's Washington State Consumer Protection Law, right? Doesn't matter who you are, you've got a product, you can't be deceptive or unfair in how you sell or market that product. And so what's happened in these cases, which are of course huge cases for all sorts of obvious reasons, right? The amount of money we're talking about it gets in the billions pretty quickly for these national settlements. So the AGs work together, and I'll take maybe the Sackler case as a good example with Purdue Pharmaceutical, worked together and worked out a settlement with the Sacklers and Purdue Pharmaceutical. It was my view that the settlement figure was not large enough, given the harm that they caused. The settlement was billions of dollars to be divided amongst all the states. Now, I don't think there's any amount of money that, let me say, that's not a matter, I don't think. There is no amount of money that's gonna bring back someone, right, lost to addiction. That's not gonna happen. So it's an imperfect form of justice, to be sure, right? So before I talk any further about it, but it is one form of justice that's appropriate. They pay for what they did, and that helps people get off addiction. We can use those dollars here in Washington State for treatment and prevention and you name it, which is badly, badly needed. So I don't have criminal authority, I have civil authority, that's a tool that I have. And so it just seemed to me that the amount of the settlement negotiated by Democratic and Republican AGs, who I know, was insufficient. And so this was a complex thing where Purdue was going through bankruptcy. The Sackler family was putting in some billions of dollars more into the bankruptcy pot. That was going to be divided amongst all these states and others. And the Sackler family, by putting some billions of dollars in, they are not bankrupt, right? They've been taking billions out of the company, Purdue Pharmaceutical, for years and stashing it overseas. New York Times has reported well on this. So they are not, the company's bankrupt, they are most certainly not. Very, very wealthy family. And so what they were essentially doing by going through this bankruptcy process, I learned more about bankruptcy than put any audience to sleep, talk about bankruptcy law. I learned more about it. But what they were doing is by, there was a view out there among some bankruptcy judges that if a company is going through bankruptcy, the people who own that company, like the Purdue, or like the Sacklers, if they put money into the bankruptcy pot, the judge can essentially, in exchange for them putting that money in, shield them from any litigation, civil liability going forward, right? They're essentially buying a legal shield for life on the civil side. So what, someone said it's crazy. Yeah, well, you want to hear, someone say it's crazy. Yeah, I want to hear something crazier. So what Purdue did, just to give you a sense of how this works. So, and there are some who say, no, you can't do that. Bankruptcy judges don't have that power, okay? In other words, how can a bankruptcy judge in New York tell the Attorney General of Washington State that I can't file a lawsuit against them just because they put some money into it and the judge agreed to it, even if I oppose it, right? To make it even worse, what Purdue did, I promise to be brief, so I'll short circuit this quickly, but what they did was they filed for bankruptcy in White Plains, New York, which is not their headquarters. It's not where they've ever been, White Plains, New York. And you can't just file for bankruptcy wherever you want. You've got to have some connection to the locality. I'll spare you the details. So what they did was they had incorporated in White Plains, New York, shortly before filing bankruptcy. Now, why would they do that? Well, I'll tell you why. In that Southern District of New York, if you file an action in White Plains, there is exactly one federal bankruptcy judge who will hear your bankruptcy, Judge Drain. And Judge Drain is well known nationwide, because he's written about this, he's spoken about and ruled on it, for embracing the idea that you put money into a bankruptcy, that he has the power to give you a legal shield for life in exchange. So that is precisely why they incorporated there. So they filed their bankruptcy there, so they knew exactly which judge they would get and knew exactly what he would say about it. So we opposed that. Why? We said, no, you can't give them a legal shield. He said, sorry, give them a legal shield. So Washington said, no, we don't accept this deal. So we led a small group of states, about 7 or 8 states. We were the lead on it. And so we challenged that bankruptcy plan, which you can do. You can take it to court. You can basically take the plan and challenge it, which is what we did. Noah Purcell, my Solicitor General, flew back to New York. He did the oral argument back in New York before a different federal judge, challenging, saying, hey, this judge didn't have the power to do that. And we won. A lot of my fellow AGs were not happy with that, right? They felt they carefully constructed this deal. We were blowing it up. You get the idea. But we won. And what happened was, at that point, the Sacklers said, okay, we'll put more money into the deal, right? They'd started at $50,000 was their first opening. Where they ended up with, after my team did their job, is they put another $1.4 billion, I think it was. And the way we did it, there were 8 or 9, I guess I should remember, maybe there were 9 states who challenged it. And what I said was, amongst the 9 of us had Zoom meetings, oh my God, more Zoom meetings than while this was all going on. And I remember saying that if there was going to be more money that came in, I said to my other 8 colleagues, Washington's going to keep the 1/9. We'll split it 9 ways. We had some big states, we had some small states, we're one of the big ones. Let's just split it 9 ways. We're going to keep our 1/9. Because it became pretty clear to me, my colleagues felt they should share that extra pot with other states who had not challenged the appeal, or not challenged the bankruptcy, which to me seemed crazy, right? But there is a feeling of, and maybe I'll sort of a final thought before I take your questions, there is something to think about as you go forward in your careers, for the students here especially, is wherever you go in life, I'm convinced there can be you have colleagues, and it's important to have colleagues, right, who you work with. In my job, my fellow AGs, they are colleagues, but I don't work for them, and they don't work for me, right? They represent their states, I represent my state, right? My allegiance is to you, right? Not to the good people of Pennsylvania or Massachusetts. But there can be a feeling, hey, we all need to get along here as AGs, right? That's true to a certain point, but they were, the 41 AGs who did the deal were in a way frustrated by our approach, okay? And they were wanting, if there's gonna be more money, well, you need to share that. We helped negotiate the underlying deal, you gotta share the additional money you bring in. Because I said, yeah, no. The only reason there's more money is because we brought this challenge. And so at the additional 1.4 billion, Washington's keeping 1/9 just for Washington. The other states are sharing with other states. And so Washington, as a result of challenging that national deal, we're like more than doubling the amount of money we would have received had we just simply taken the national deal. Now there's risk attached to that. There was risks attached to when I rejected the deal with distributors, these 3 distributors. We took them to trial. You know, if you lose a trial, you get nothing, of course, right? But in the end, at the conclusion of trial, we reached a settlement that brought in tens of millions more dollars for Washington we would have had I taken the national deal. And so just a final thought on these opioids cases, what I would say is that they are, you know, I think I would perhaps say of all the decisions I've made as Attorney General in maybe now a decade or so, those might have been the most challenging because the amount of money was so large, the harm inflicted was so significant, the need to assist people in the state was so dramatic with whatever resources we could bring in, and there's just so much going on with other AGs and very sophisticated corporations and litigation and trials and negotiations and all that those were, you know, not a whole lot keeps me up at night. I can sleep pretty well, but you know, if you're turning down hundreds of millions of dollars, if someone ever told me when I was in law school that I would turn down a settlement of hundreds of millions of dollars, right, for my client and go to trial and say, I would say, yeah, that's probably kind of crazy, right? But there we were, that's what we did. Fortunately, it's paid off so far. We have more cases. We go to trial against Johnson. Johnson turned down a national deal there. We go to trial against them next year. So these are huge cases, very complex legally. Takes a lot of effort from the team in my office, as you might imagine, right? If you go up against those companies, they're just going to drown you. What we call discovery, for example, asking for documents. And it's a huge, huge lift, and that's an understatement to litigate these cases. But the team's done a very good job. So one reason I've been able to do that is because I have confidence in everybody in my office, right? To be able to bring these cases and ultimately bring these companies to their knees and make them pay more, which is a help for the people of the state. All right, I promised to end at the halfway point. I just about made it. So I think we're turning now to questions, Cornell. Is that right? Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Maybe I'll start it off. You mentioned the threat that social media poses to our democracy.
Yeah.
And campaign finance, transparency is important, but there's a real problem with disinformation and misinformation on social media. Mm-hmm. So my question is there any remedy under state law to go after these companies? And if not, if it's preempted by federal legislation, what would you recommend in terms of federal legislation?
Yeah, good question. So there's a lot of challenges with the misinformation that's out there, in part because, hey, we live in a free country. You can say what you want in this world. The First Amendment's a wonderful thing. In fact, someone asked me, I recently gave a talk about the Constitution recently. I don't know if you guys have seen this play, What the Constitution Means to Me, but it's at the Seattle Rep right now. It was on Netflix or somewhere. It's back on Broadway. It's written by a Washington woman, actually. If you haven't seen it yet, I think you can see it on one of those platforms. It's fantastic. And I spoke afterwards. Someone asked what my favorite amendment was. I said, I can't really choose a favorite amendment, but I'd say First Amendment might be my favorite. You can say whatever you want in this country, right? I love that about the country. Well, that creates challenges. Even if it's misinformation, how you bring a legal challenge. So I don't pretend to be an expert on kind of what Congress could do to address that. I guess if I could say maybe, Cornell, is what I feel I can do in relation to misinformation or the big lie, right, whatever you want to call it. And what I tend to spend most of my time, there are a lot of big issues out there, and that I'm glad people are thinking about. And you might be surprised I don't spend as much time thinking about those as you might think, in part because what I have in front of me that I have some control over, things we're talking about, for example, just occupies kind of all my headspace, plus having young kids, right? That just takes all my time. So in some ways, I don't spend as much time thinking about some things that you might think I would, just because I don't have the bandwidth for it. But what I would say is what I try to focus on, I'm just a big believer in, is in whatever you're doing in your life, is focus on what you can control. Okay, whatever your lane is in life, focus on that. And so when it comes to the big lie or misinformation, we do have a role that I've tried to maximize, and that is, it's come up a couple of ways specifically. So one is that after, and by the way, before I go into details, I will say that I do think the misinformation, the big lie, whatever you want to call it, I just think you can draw a direct line from that to whether or not we have a functioning republic and democracy in our country. Full stop. No one will ever persuade me otherwise of that. And I no longer take for granted that my kids will live in the same form of government that I was raised in. I just don't take that for granted anymore at all. In large part because of the misinformation, and so many Americans believe the 2020 election was rigged somehow, right, against Donald Trump. And so starting with that as a starting point for me anyway, is that after the 2020 election, Lauren Culp is the guy who ran against James Lee for governor in 2020 and lost. He lost by a mere 480,000 votes. It's that close for him. And so what he did not do after losing his election is concede gracefully. And that's not what he did. He told his followers election had been stolen, which he can do. So here's your question, right? He can say that. I can't file some lawsuit if I think he's a small man for doing that, right? I can't stop him from saying that. But what he did next was he filed a lawsuit challenging election results, saying it was stolen. Well, guess who can do something about that? That's me. So he filed a lawsuit. Big mistake. Because in a courtroom, there's a different set of rules than what he wants to tweet out to his followers, right? In a courtroom, when you file a lawsuit, you have to have some basis in law and fact for your lawsuit. Now, to be clear, the bar for that is extremely low, okay? It's a rare day indeed when a court, a judge, kicks out a lawsuit without ever hearing because it's frivolous. And that's for a good reason. Disputes should be heard, even if it seems unlikely, right? The court should be welcome to everybody who's got some basis in law and fact for their complaint. But when he filed this lawsuit, I met with Noah and the team, and I remember saying, hey, can we file a motion seeking sanctions against, you can seek sanctions against the lawyer and the individual filing the lawsuit if it's truly frivolous for wasting the court's time and the other side's time. So the team went back to take a look, they came back and said, yep, we think it's frivolous. So I said, send a letter to Culp's lawyer saying we're going to file this motion in 24 hours unless they withdraw their lawsuit. Guess what happened? Within 24 hours, withdrew the lawsuit. With prejudice, by the way, which is just a fancy term that means he can never file it again. Okay? It's like the legal equivalent of walking away with your tail between your legs. That's what that is, okay? That's how that case ended. Another one came up. Forget the name of the organization. They've got some name like the Center for Election Integrity or something that sounds really great. Same deal. Election was stolen. This time we just filed sanctions against them. The state Supreme Court just recently upheld those sanctions. It's tens of thousands of dollars against the lawyer and the entity. We filed a bar complaint against the lawyer with the State Bar Association for filing a frivolous case. And I guess what I'm saying, by way of a long answer, Cornell, is I do believe, and I kind of wish more sort of prosecutors, AGs were out there would take that approach on those cases. That I just think you just have to, I guess what I would say is, I feel like I'm a reasonable guy, but there are times in life you have to draw a line in the sand. Trust me on this, right? And there is no accommodation, okay? That doesn't come along very often in my view in the work that I do, but there are times when I tell the team, don't come back to me with any settlement conversation. There's nothing to talk about here. There's nothing to talk about. Go forth and litigate and win. It's a line in the sand, and that's how I view this. So, what Congress can do or can't do, I'm just I'm not the expert on that, right? You've got folks who come here who really are, who could maybe speak to it. What I can say is how I view my role and what I can or can't do. There's no limitations around that, what I can and can't do. But when I feel I have the opportunity where I can do something, that's the approach that I've taken on. Yeah, should I just go around and call people? So I have a bunch of hands, so I'll go here and then I'll go here, go right ahead, yeah.
So you can respond to a lawsuit,
Yes.
but if there's no lawsuit, is there anything else you can do, like a fraudulent claim or something like that?
Yeah, so there's, it's not out of the question, right? It's just you've got to balance that, some claim you're bringing, right, of fraud versus free speech. So people can simply say what they want to say out there too on social media. And so, part of my job is choosing good cases with the resources we have. It's part of my job. But there's lots of cases I would have loved to have filed against the Trump administration we never filed because I didn't think they were good cases. We had the cases we did file, I think we had like 54, 55 cases got resolved. We won 53 of them, right? So part of my job is we've only got so many folks in the office, so many cases, so much bandwidth, bring good cases. That's in some ways, it's the biggest part of my job in a certain sense, right? Is making sure I'm being thoughtful. So I'm not saying never say never, but I need to be mindful of that and the challenges that come with balancing out those competing goals. Yes, sir.
It seems to me, along this vein, that there's more and more use of the judicial system, not for justice, but to block justice. Even Alex Jones last week, walking out of the courtroom saying they'll never get a cent.
Yeah.
Am I right? Is it more? And if it is, what can be done to bring more justice back to the justice system?
It's interesting. I mean, we live in a litigious society, right? That's been that way for a long time. I guess I take a more optimistic view of the justice system, honestly. So, look, Alex Jones, I did happen to see what he said about that. I'm not sure he's right when he says they're never going to see a cent out of me. I'll just start with that. But what I will say is that one has to, with the justice system, there are exceptions, but one has to be patient in getting to that point of justice, right? It can be a long road. In the GMA case you talked about right earlier, it was years, years. They balled us up in court for years. But in the end, they finally ran out of appeals, right? An end finally came. They had to write that check for many millions of dollars, but it came. I wasn't trying to be AG to see it, what's going on so long, but that can certainly happen. That it just takes a long time. So you just got to be willing to stick with those cases all the way through. And that's especially the case if Alex Jones, no doubt, is paying for a lawyer. If the other side has resources to bottle you up, you can be in court for a long, long time. That said, I guess I feel like, so I hear that concern, but at least I found in my experience with the judicial system is that I believe it still works. There are certainly challenges. The bigger challenges I see is that, access to justice I see as a huge issue. Is you can have all these wonderful laws, but for many individuals, being able to access those laws in a meaningful way, some corporations not playing by the rules, right? Well, it's only meaningful to you if you have an advocate who knows what they're doing, who you can afford, who can be there in court for you to advocate for you. The disparities between a Facebook, right, and a Washingtonian concerned about campaign finance it's beyond vast, right? That's why you have an AG's office. We can bring that down a little bit. So I'd say that I see as a concern. The things I do think that, I think a big test for me, from my perspective, of the judicial system was during the Trump administration. My partisan leanings are clear, right? Full disclosure on that, right? But the fact that we could, on the first Muslim travel ban, it was executed on a Friday evening. We filed our lawsuit Monday after a very long weekend. I think I gave a talk on that here a long time ago, right? After a busy weekend. We were before a federal judge on Friday. Got our decision that day, stopping the ban. That's quite a country, right? You can do that. Some guy can just, with a great office, can just file a lawsuit against the president and stop this thing from happening in a week. That's, so the system has its flaws. Believe me, but I believe it works overall. I think it works. That said, Alex Jones, he's going to ball those things up for a long, long time. But I'm not so sure he's right when he says, I think was the verdict like $1 billion or something? I'm sorry if I'm wrong. It was something look, I don't know what his resources are. I have zero idea. But whatever resources he's got, I bet some of those are going over to those families, as they should. Yeah.
Let's just say hypothetically, this is kind of.
Every lawyer knows, never answer a hypothetical question. All right, go for it. All right.
But if you were to, let's say, get through the power of the sovereign and be able to change the criminal code, I know you're not necessarily in charge of criminal law, but let's say you were to change the criminal code of Washington State, what crimes would you remove and what crimes would you add?
Oh, what criminal laws would I change or remove? That's pretty tough. So we do have a small, but I should say by way of background, we are like 99% a civil law firm.
Yeah.
I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning. We do have a small criminal division. The way it works, it's actually counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of folks, but the folks who prosecute your criminal laws are your county prosecutors, have sort of the most authority, okay? And city attorneys also have, like on misdemeanors, have some authority. The AG's office, I do not have what's called original criminal jurisdiction. If someone breaks into your car, I have no authority to do anything about that. That's your local prosecutors. However, county prosecutors can refer cases to my office if they have a conflict, for example, and can't bring it. So we have a small team that does it. So we interact a little bit with criminal laws. I guess the one that I would say, if I was going to pick one on the criminal side, is I think Washington should abolish the death penalty. I've always believed that. Somewhat ironically, I have a job that helps to enforce the death penalty. The state Supreme Court thankfully did, I lose track of time, 2 years ago maybe, issued an important decision that said that the racial disparities in our criminal justice system, and with the death penalty specifically, they declared it unconstitutional as applied. So the law is still in the books, it's just the way that's been, it's not saying it's unconstitutional, period. As applied means the way it's actually implemented in a practical sense, that's unconstitutional, which means that theoretically, you could fix the death penalty and still have it. This happened before at the U.S. Supreme Court level. I'll spare you the details, but the U.S. Supreme Court in the 70s said, hey, sir, unconstitutional as applied. There were fixes to death penalties, right? And then it came back, right? And so I would remove it from the books if I was totally in charge. Each year we propose as a state legislature to take the death penalty off the books. I'm optimistic this year that they might actually do it. You know, in a broader sense with criminal justice, this isn't a specific law, but you know, this won't be news to any of you, but you know, the racial inequities we have in our criminal justice system are profound. There's no way to sugarcoat that. There's no law that anyone can write that changes that overnight. But that is, so the question of the justice system generally, criminal justice specifically, I find those issues to be perhaps the most sort of challenging and troubling, and that need to be fixed. Yeah.
So for the like Facebook case,
Yeah.
I was wondering if you think that like the motive behind it, like it's just that they are doing like illegal business deals or something and they'd be losing money, or is there any like intentional thing that they're doing?
Great question. So the question is for Facebook, well, why do I think they're not following the law? Like, well, what's in it for them? Why are they resisting it? Basically, that, you know, I'm often asked for kind of high-profile cases we have. I'm often asked some variation of that question: why is the other side doing what they're doing or not doing what they're not doing? So the honest answer is I don't know. Right? They're not telling me. But I guess what I would say is that I wonder about it sometimes. I don't spend a ton of time thinking about it because it doesn't really make a difference for our case, but I do sometimes wonder why they do it. I think, if I had to guess, it's a money generator for them that might not be insignificant, you know, across the country. And if they've got to change how they do in Washington, maybe other states will adopt similar laws and put similar restrictions on them, maybe. That said, I mean, we're a pretty wealthy company. Can it really be that much money? Do you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah.
Do you think that like there could be any like motivation, because you said that it was like jeopardizing our democracy, like do you think they could be intentionally trying to do that?
I don't think that. No, I don't think that. But I will say it's, again, so I don't know, but I will say, how about this? I have, in my work as Attorney General, I spend a lot of time filing lawsuits against big corporations, right? It's a part of what we do. And you know, it's my sense, often, not always, but often, they just have a different way of looking sometimes at the law than I do. And I suspect that all of you do as well. I've been in the room with these guys. It's mostly guys, by the way, you know, not always, mostly guys. And it's just, it's frustrating, right? In that, I mean, I'm just saying what I think, right? That I think they sometimes just think a different set of rules should apply. And that's not okay from my perspective, right? There's not. So I'm not saying all, right? And they've got every right to challenge that law. They've got the right to do that. They can. I just wonder why on earth do they want to, right? Why on earth do they want to? And don't they have some responsibility as a corporation here in our state to, I'm just amazed there's not someone in the boardroom saying, what on God's green earth are we all doing here? This is the fight we're picking? Really? I'm just being honest, right? Like, that no one just stands up and says, what are we doing? Right? And I do think it's healthy. Look, I mean, I'm kind of going off from your question, but I think it's important for every executive to have someone close to them who's willing to say that to them, including myself, right? And so if you don't have that around you, a groupthink gets in place and you think, well, we're gonna take this on. So I wish I had a better answer for you, honestly. I sometimes wonder that myself. It seems like it's more trouble than it's worth for them, getting beat up in court and the bad publicity that comes with it, but we'll see if they change their mind. Yeah.
I was curious your thoughts on how to move forward in a productive way when we're dealing with corporations where these massive settlements are simply the cost of doing
Yeah.
business?
Great question. So that is a frustration for me as well. So even if it's 24 million plus our 10 million in costs and fees, okay, really, for Facebook? So is that the cost of doing business? Even if that's a large sum for almost anybody with very few exceptions. Yeah, it probably is the cost of doing business for them. So it's, how about this? We have this exact conversation in my office many times. Okay, so for what it's worth, it's that is true. Number two, I work within a certain set of rules, right? The law lays out what the penalties can be. In fact, we've gone to the state legislature multiple times seeking different areas to update the penalties in different kinds of cases, because often they've not been updated literally for decades. If they got set in stone at one time, well, times have changed a little bit. And so, for most entities, 24 million bucks would be a pretty rough day. For Facebook, not so much. And so it's actually, to your question, it's part of the reason why I remember saying to my team early on in this case, I want to put out there that they are challenging the constitutionality of Washington state law. I want the people of the state to know that's what this company's doing. It's not just, some other lawsuit and they have to pay some money. No, this is what this company's choosing to do, Washingtonians, right? And so, to try and elevate that part of the conversation. So there's a reason why I'm telling it to all of you, just so you know that's what they're doing. Because look, it could be 100 million, it could be 200 million, let's be honest, right? They could keep doing it. And it's different for different companies. I mean, I never really know how much it hurts some of these companies, honestly, financially, right? But I can't worry about it too much because I can only ask for what I can ask for, right? And those are what the rules are. So what I would say is, hey, point well taken. I still think it's a bad look for Facebook to be going through this and the publicity. And again, my hope is at some point someone does stand up in that boardroom and says, "What are we doing? Let's not appeal this case. Let's just move on from this." But it's a fair question. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about the line being drawn between misinformation and the destruction of democracy.
Yeah.
Is there grounds for a law in place to prevent social media from creating algorithms that put people into echo chambers and create the spread of misinformation?
Yeah, so I mean, this sort of goes back maybe to Cornell's question about, hey, is there something Congress can be doing? So, I'm sorry, I'm not giving you a very satisfactory answer, right? That's just not my role, right? I'm not a congressperson. I'm not a lawmaker, right? I enforce the laws, right, that are there. So, I guess what I would say, maybe the only answer I can really give you is as Attorney General, right? I view my role as using every tool I can to help uphold our democracy, right? If I was a congressman, I can guarantee you what would be the first and second and third thing I'd be thinking about every morning is issues like that and what I could be doing as a member of Congress, right, to strengthen our democracy. That's what I'd be doing. Well, I'm not saying there are a lot of important issues out there for a member of Congress. There are, but that's what I'd be thinking about every morning. And I'd be talking to my team about it every single morning. So I'm just not. That's just not my job. And so that stuff sounds logical to me, but hey, making laws is challenging, right? And but that's where my focus would be if I was in Congress. Yeah, but I would encourage you to engage with your members of Congress on these things, right? I mean, really. And look, the reason we have our campaign transparent laws in Washington State is a group of people got together and made them, honestly, right? So I'd encourage you to do that as well. Yeah, next question.
Slightly technical question, but I think in traditional media, it's just someone gives money to the media company and then they run an ad, and everyone who watches that company sees that, right?
Yeah.
In the case of social media, it's people give the money and then the social media company won't serve that ad to everyone equally. So my question
If they're
is,
targeting, right?
yeah, with algorithm.
Yeah.
But so my question is, if the campaign law, which you were trying to uphold, goes into effect for companies like Facebook,
Yeah.
would we get any information on basically who the ads were served to, or
Yes.
how the algorithm is working, or would we just know that I don't know, a Republican gave $1,000 to run ads on Facebook, or a Democrat ran $1,000 worth of ads on Facebook?
I hope I don't get this wrong, but I work from memory on a lot of things, but I think I'm right about this. So first, the law exists now, by the way. So the law's there. They're simply not following it, right? But the information, I believe, with Facebook, and you could look it up if you're curious, you could look it up, but I'm pretty confident it does go to who the targeting, what the targeting is. Algorithms, I don't know anything about that. I doubt that's part, but the targeting, yes, there's more than simply who paid for it and the name of that person. I'm 99% sure I'm right about that. I would probably need to double check to be sure. And so I believe that's a part of what they would have to make available. Yes?
Different topic.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the pandemic, the state lost a huge amount of money because of fraudulent
Yes.
unemployment claims.
Yes.
You have anything to updates or anything about that at all?
Yeah, so the state lost hundreds of millions of dollars. I can't remember the exact 750 million. Somebody helped me out, but it was a significant amount of money. The state of Washington was not alone on that. Obviously, virtually every state went through a similar experience. Some states did worse than Washington, believe it or not. So Washington has recovered. So this, our clients do this a lot of this, right? So I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe that the state's recovered a half to 2/3 of the money that was lost so far. I think I'm pretty close on that. Our office has been, so typically that'd be like sort of a client thing that's going on, right? That we're giving legal advice to them, but but we, in fact, an attorney in our office, Jeff Sprung, actually came up with the idea of saying that he realized that some of these banks were holding some of these funds, right, that had red flags attached to them, but the money hadn't left the bank yet, hadn't gone to bad actors yet. So it's essentially sitting there. And he said, wait a second, we were the first state to do this. He said, wait, we can go to the banks, file, essentially it's a legal proceeding to get that money back for Washington State. In fact, we just filed it against a big bank the other day for like another $15 million from them. So we've recovered a lot of money through this process of going to banks to get that money. I think we're the only state so far to do it. I'm not sure why other AGs aren't picking up on this. So we do have a role in recovering. So we're still doing that. We literally just filed one of these. If you Google it, right, Attorney General and that issue and bank, you'll see it. So I don't have the exact amount that we've recovered because this is an ongoing process. It's very labor intensive. So we have been pretty active in doing that just on our own initiative to recover as much as we can. In addition, at the end of the day, will we recover all of it? No, that's not going to happen. But the state has, I want to say 2/3 has been recovered so far. I'm not sure if my team knows the answer to that, but I think it's about 2/3 so far, and we're still recovering more.
Any prosecutions at all?
So on the, I mean, those are, when you get into that, you get into Department of Justice, right? Because you have this is going on in multiple states, so I can't speak to whether they're doing anything. What I would just say is those can be challenging cases to prosecute criminally for those who have that authority. I don't, but for those who have it, in that, my understanding, these bad actors are often out of the country, right? That it's very, very difficult. We see that even locally with scams that go on people dialing your phone, for example, and extracting money from you through a scam that way. Often those actors are overseas, and it's very, very difficult to get that money back. So I think about 2/3 has been recovered, and we're still working on recovering more. Thanks. Yes.
I just had a question about your work as Attorney General in general, which is that I was wondering, in enacting sort of your duties in that role, I was wondering what other, I'd say a government official, I guess I'd say, or political office holders you generally have to work closest with in your role as Attorney General.
Yeah, so maybe we'll make this one the last one, Cornell, now the final thought. So who I work with most closely, that's a good question. I've really thought of it that way before. I guess I would say of other elected officials who I work with most closely, I guess I would first say other state AGs. Other state AGs, I probably, in terms of for me, because there can be cases where I'm talking to them every single day. Some of the Trump litigation, the opioids litigation, it's constant, right? And so the teams are obviously coordinating, but sometimes those AGs just have to be having conversations, and there can be disagreements. That's kind of hurts. Maybe disagreements about what we're doing and how to proceed, or agreement and how to figure that out. So I would say for myself, that's probably number one. Number two, what I would say is the legislature as a whole, right? A lot of legislators, different issues come up with them. It could be legal advice we're giving or things we're working on the policy side that we're just in constant communication with different legislators all the time. And I'd say among statewide elected officials, the governor, maybe for obvious reasons, right? That we're in fairly regular communication, as you might imagine, and that's an important relationship. So it'd be hard to, I'm leaving out. I mean, county prosecutors. It can be a little bit things step up from time to time in a certain area. But I guess if I thought about it, I think other state AGs is maybe where I spend the most of my time in my work. And hey, just so a final thought before we wrap up, right on schedule, right? So I think there is still some more pizza, but just the last thing I'll say is, especially for the students who are here, is, as you're going forth in life, give some thought to public service, whatever form that is, give some thought to it. It's a great life. You won't make as much money as you would go in the private sector. I don't make as much money as I would make in the private sector. I drive a very old car. The car before my very old car was so old that when it got totaled, I think it was like a 20-year-old car, and a teenager ran a red light and totaled it. And I realized, your car is old when the person who totals your car is younger than the car. That's a sign you have an old car. So when I called up my wife, I don't know why I'm talking about this. I called up my wife, Colleen, after she never liked the car. She wanted a new car. We had kids. You get the idea. So I called her up from the crash thing. This teenager totaled the car. I called up Colleen. I said, hey, I just been in this car accident. And I said, I think the car. She said, how's the car? I said, I think it's totaled. There was a pause, and she said, are you sure? She was glad. I replaced with another 20-year-old car, but I digress from my point, which is public service. I just mean this in all sincerity, right? That you only get one life, right? And you guys have a lot of skills, right? You're at Washington State University. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have a lot of skills, and you can do a lot of things with your life. And I'm not saying don't go forth and make a lot of money if that's what you want to do. More power to you. It's nice to be able to pay for things, but you don't need as many things as you think you need. I'm just telling you, you really don't. And there's, I just think that there's so many challenges we face as a country, as a state, as a community that take your considerable skills at some point in your life, whenever that is, and think about how you want to use that in a way that helps your community. I would really encourage you to think about it. Thanks, everybody. Go Cougs.